Now, the book of Ruth is the sixth R. We have our 5 R's of the sin cycle, and then the book of Ruth is our other R, our sixth R for this particular session that we call Downward Spiral. And here's why we place it here. Look how the book of Ruth begins on page 97, Ruth 1:1. It says, "In the days when the judges ruled." Okay, so this is dated. The book of Ruth is dated somewhere between about 1200 and 1000, okay? So somewhere in a couple 100-year period, we have the book of Ruth. It's a 4-chapter book, and it sits right here in our Old Testament with a very specific reason in mind. Theologically, the book of Ruth is trying to say this, and it's really fascinating. Think about the story. You have an Israelite family who has abandoned Israel. They have left Israel because of famine. They've essentially said, God's not blessing us, the nation's gone terribly, we're not obeying God, we are so unconcerned with the covenant, with obeying the Lord in the land that we're getting the heck out of there. And they turn their back on God, they turn their back on the land, and they move in to Moabite territory. The book of Ruth begins in a really sad place, and what happens is, all of the males in this Israelite family, so it's a father and his 2 sons, and they will move into Moabite territory, and the 2 sons will take Moabite wives, and then all the men of the family die. Can you see the theological point that's trying to be made here? When you turn your back on God and you turn your back on His promises and you run into enemy territory thinking that'll make things better, when you run into the world, in other words, it only makes things worse. And now we have the conundrum for the characters. You have in the story Naomi, who is the Israelite mom, and then her 2 daughters-in-law. And the question becomes, now what will they do? Naomi decides to return back to her land, and the 2 daughters-in-law have a choice to make. Will they stay in Moab, in their own territory, with their own family, with their own gods, or will they go with Naomi back into this downward spiral land called Israel? One of them stays, one of them goes. And the one that goes with Naomi, her mother-in-law, back to what is her foreign territory, to this place called Israel, her name is Ruth. And Ruth will form for us, she will serve for us as a model of a radical shift in allegiance from the gods of Moab and to the God Yahweh. And she says to Naomi, I will go where you go, and your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. And here's what's so fascinating. I hear all the time people saying that the Bible is anti-women. It's chauvinistic. It is backwards when it comes to women. It is male-centered. It is misogynistic. And it is true. There are parts of the Bible that I'm sure make modern readers, myself included, uncomfortable. And we got to be okay with that. We got to be honest about that. But what I want to just highlight, even in this moment as we talk about Ruth, is how out of its way the Bible will go, not just New Testament, how out of its way the Bible goes to hold up in esteem these female characters like Ruth. By the way, Ruth serving as this amazing example of a complete loyalty and allegiance shift from the Moabite gods to Yahweh. She sounds exactly like Rahab, doesn't it? Think of the same thing. Rahab, this female prostitute growing up in Jericho, she abandons her allegiance to the gods of the Canaanites, and instead she says, I will go with Yahweh. While the people of Israel had struggled to trust Yahweh, here's this woman named Rahab. While the people of Israel struggle in our downward spiral movement, here's this woman named Ruth. And it's like the Bible's going out of its way time and time again to hold up as examples for us these women of faith who trust Yahweh. This is a foreign, non-Israelite woman, and she gets it, and she trusts. While the nation of Israel just over and over and over again fails to trust. Do you see why we keep highlighting that the Bible is a trust book trying to get the reader to trust in Yahweh, who is a covenant maker and covenant keeper? That's the point. Now, here's what's so cool about the story of Ruth. Ruth is going to have a very important family line. You can go read how the story unfolds. God keeps blessing her in crazy ways. She will have grandkids. And one of those grandkids is going to be named Jesse. And Jesse will have a child named David. Ruth will serve as the great-great-grandparent to King David. And what's also fascinating, when we look at the book of Matthew in the New Testament, the genealogy of Jesus, there are 5 women listed in his genealogy. One of them will be Ruth, a foreign Moabite woman. Why is she there? Because it's a model of trust. It's a model of what faith looks like. Faith is not an internal feeling. Faith is not praying a prayer. Faith is a radical shift of allegiance to put our trust in Yahweh, our trust in God. And Ruth serves for us as an amazing example of that in her life. And her life takes place in the period of the Judges. That's why we put her here in our downward spiral movement.